All right, Ms. Smith, we're here and we're doing a post-observation conference, and we're going to go over my evaluation of your lesson. And ideally, what we want to do is we want to figure out what you did well and find ways that you can improve in an effort to increase your effectiveness as a teacher.
Okay.
First thing I want to ask you is why you decided to teach this particular lesson.
The skill that was taught in this lesson was part of the school curriculum that was given to me.
Mr. Ryan, please call 7312. Mr. Ryan, please call 7312.
Okay,
And
part of the curriculum.
Yes, and it will also help prepare them to do well in the HESPA, which is the upcoming test for them.
Okay, great. There were some good parts. I'm sorry, do you think there were some good parts, some bad parts? In general, how do you think the lesson went?
I think it went okay.
Okay. Do you think that you obtained the goals of the lesson?
I do believe so after looking at the material that I collected from the students at the end of that block.
Okay, excellent. I think you did too. Just so you know, I thought the lesson went really well. I thought you did a very good job. From looking at your lesson plans, two things I was looking for was, is there a knowledge of your students, meaning particularly their needs, their individual needs, their needs as a class, and I think that you have possess a very keen knowledge of your students. I think that you have a firm grasp of each student's particular learning needs, and I think that you did a good job of using modifications to meet those needs. The second thing I was looking for in your lesson plan was whether you designed a coherent lesson plan. The instruction was very thorough and precise. I thought that you took into account the needs of the special education classroom, and that came through in your instruction. Is there any particular model that you follow when designing a lesson plan?
This district follows the UBD, Understanding by Design, so I keep that in mind when writing my daily and unit lesson plans.
Okay. And as far as developing assessments, is there a particular model or?
We just use a multitude of assessments.
Okay. All right. Which one do you think works best?
Assessment-wise?
Yeah.
Probably doing a quick write, like a take it out at the end of the class, just to see if that daily SWOT or that daily lesson was achieved.
Oh, okay, so it's like almost like immediate feedback.
Yes.
Like, did they get it? Did they get it or not?
Yeah, so I guess more formative.
That's great thoughts. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through really quickly and kind of highlight the major points of the lesson. I recorded the entire lesson, and I used that record of the lesson plus what I did observe as the basis for determining what aspects of teaching you do very well and things you might need to improve upon. At the end, if there's anything that you think may be inaccurate, just let me know, okay? The teacher welcomed the students at the door as soon as the bell rang. She let them know that they were going to have a test very soon. She gave them the date. She began to present the day's lesson about static and dynamic characters. She discussed examples from a popular movie of these types of characters. She called upon the students to talk about the characters. She then entered into a presentation of the activities that the students will identify static and dynamic characters from the story, looking for characteristics from the story that make them static or dynamic. Students were going to read The Slaughtered Lamb that was presented. The story was read. The students were asked to pull characters from the story, and at one point the teacher said to focus on Mrs. Maloney, who I guess was probably the main character of the story.
That's correct.
Okay. The students tracked the character throughout the story and looked for clues as to whether she is a static or dynamic character. The students used the graphic organizers to record the information they pulled from the story and track Mrs. Maloney. As they read, they discussed. You moved around the room often, several times, and helped students individually with their work, whether it be reading the story and trying to pull clues or whether it was filling out the graphic organizer. As the class continued through the lesson, they continued to identify clues, and they were also instructed to look for quotations from the stories that might lend the character being static or dynamic. Okay. Was that the general procedure of the lesson?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. The class read the remainder of the story together and was instructed to list more information on the chart. The teacher asked the students for their opinions of what type of person Mrs. Maloney is. They listed their responses. The teacher again walked around the room, assisting individual students with their work, then addressed a student about her behavior and continued with the activity. She had them write again and continue to walk around the room, giving instructions, helping them finish the charts until the last several minutes of the class. With 2 minutes left, the teacher instructed the students to write down whether Mrs. Maloney is a static or dynamic character. And the graphic organizers were collected from the students, and the students were instructed to prepare a leave. Pretty much the lesson?
Yep.
Okay. And also in there, I'm sorry I can't find it right here, there was also a mention of foreshadowing at the beginning of the lesson, which was a concept that you guys had previously worked on.
That's
and
right.
Then that concept was studied in the lesson as well, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I noticed that. All right. I thought it was a great lesson. I think you had a very strong overall performance, okay? And that's kind of what we're doing every time we get up in front of the classroom is we're putting on a performance. Now, before we start talking about your performance, I want you to realize I've been there, okay? I was in your seat, you know, and I had somebody else criticize my work as well. So I understand the challenge. I understand the challenges that you face, and you know obstacles that you face when you get up in front of the classroom. And I can honestly say you did much better in your third year than I ever did in my fourth or fifth year. So I think you're doing very well. I believe, as a matter of fact, I know you will continue to do well. You will definitely do well if you continue with the same level of passion and commitment. Some words that just come to mind when I think of you as an educator. Number one is passion, all right? Caring, understanding, knowledgeable, thorough, and effective. Caring, I think, is the most important to being successful. Effective, I think, is the most successful. So, I mean, you've got both those characteristics going for you. So I think you're doing a great job. Evidence of effective teaching. There were several domains that we went through based on the Danielson model of evaluation, demonstrating knowledge of content and pedagogy, okay? You definitely know your content, okay? You know it and you're passionate about it, and I think you do an excellent job of demonstrating that. Creating an environment of respect and rapport with the students, I think is fantastic as well. One thing that I think about often when I think about this particular domain is, well, first of all, you've done a good job of establishing a rapport with the students and gaining their respect, their trust, and it's a very open line of communication between you and them. The one thing I think you do well is, and it goes back to an old quote, they really don't care what you know unless they know that you care. Okay, I think you illustrate that well, that you care, and they understand that. So I think you're doing a great job, and they're learning from it. Establishing a culture of learning. In your classroom, the students' emotional and physical needs are definitely being met to the best of your ability. Whatever goes on outside the room, you know, we'd like to be able to control that, but we can't. But everything in your room, you're doing a great job of establishing a culture of learning. Organizing physical space, I think, is fantastic. Two things that I think you do very well. Number one, you do not have a teacher-centered classroom. It's a student-centered classroom. And number two, you move around the classroom. All right, too many teachers spend a lot of time up in the front. You move around a lot. Whether you are or are not directly working with the students, you're all over the classroom. Or working with individual students, you're all over the classroom. I think that's great. And your questioning and discussion techniques were fantastic. You did an excellent job of using wait time and Socratic questioning, which are, I think, two very effective teaching techniques. I'm a big fan of wait time and Socratic questioning, and so great job. You did a good job of providing feedback to students, and when you did two things. Number one, you validated their correct responses and you dignify incorrect responses and help them to find correct responses. I think you did a great job of providing them with feedback, and you seem to be very flexible with the students, and especially being in a special ed classroom, that's something that you have to provide for them based on all the variety of different learning needs. You also were very flexible in the types of multimodal approaches you took to your teaching and your assessments. You allowed written and verbal activities, which is great. A lot of good things there. Couple things, areas in need of improvement. Managing classroom procedures. Some kids sometimes were left hanging, so to say. There were times when a student may not have been totally engaged. Okay. Do you remember any particular times that may have happened in your lesson? Okay. All right. So you understand what we're looking for there.
Absolutely.
As far as that is concerned. Okay. Managing student behavior. You do a very good job. It's proficient, but I know you can do better. I know you can do better. One thing I think is when you have a disruptive student, one thing that you can do better is if you deal with it more immediately, okay? And depending on the student and depending on the infraction, with varying levels of consequences, but to immediately deal with it is going to help you. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay. Communicating clearly and accurately. There was more than one time during the lesson I thought that you could have been more clear in your instructions. Not your instruction, your instructions. There were a couple times where I noticed students, and even myself at one point, where it was a little unsure on what they were supposed to be doing. So just a little bit more clear and maybe a little bit more thorough on explaining the directions, making it clear to them. And that could be multimodal as well. That could be explaining and also giving them written, okay? Or that could be explaining, giving them written, or having them explain them back to you, okay? And